Welcome back, everybody. I am so thrilled. As many of you know who've been listening to this podcast, I have been doing this for 8 years. October marks the 8 years I've been recording this podcast. And maybe some of you know this, but many of you don't. I made an intention after reading The Big Leap with my husband, Steve, laying there in meditation, doing the mantra that my goal to start a podcast was to interview Gay Hendricks. It was the reason I started this podcast 8 years ago. And the first time I had him on my show, it was like, do I need to keep doing this podcast? But I was so energized by it that I kept doing it. If you don't know Dr. Hendricks, he's a gifted writer and speaker, and along with his wife, he has an incredible institute and foundation of conscious living that he runs. He's the author of the best-selling book, as I mentioned, The Big Leap, Conscious Loving, Conscious Luck, which I read as well. And I'm so excited to have him here today to talk about his memoir, Loving Life, which we're going to talk about today. It's such a thrill to have him here, and I don't know what else to say, but welcome to the show, Gay. I appreciate you.
Thank you very much, Azul. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, I was I was mentioning this to you before we jumped on, how I've read lots of memoirs, and I usually get a ton from them. Usually I get a lot of insight from the author who's writing them. I'm just never really expecting to be transfixed and transformed in reading a memoir, because it just sort of took me by surprise, and not by what you said in the book, but what you were doing as as giving me the gift of your life, which I felt like that's what happened to me when I was reading your book. I was like, oh my gosh, if this is like giving away the prized possession that someone has, and it's your life. And I gleaned so many moments for myself personally, but I want to talk about that in a moment and talk about what moved you to write a book about your life, a memoir. So much of your life is in your books. Why a memoir? Why did you do that?
Well, I think I owe a lot of that to Katie, my wife. We're just celebrating our 44th wedding anniversary, by the way. Uh,
Congratulations.
so she's my first reader and critic and that kind of thing. And but where the book came from was I would spontaneously tell her some story about a crazy job I had or something about my piece of work mother or my extreme piece of work grandmother. They and Katie would say, "You've got to write that down. You know, people would love to hear that." And so she kept doing that for about 20 years, and finally, I would say about 10 years ago, I started collecting mem- memories and anecdotes and things and writing them down. So all glory to Katie for the original inspiration.
I've watched many of Katie's videos on YouTube. I learned so much from her as well. But I sense how much you've learned from her in your partnership and in your books you wrote. But I was really struck by the choices you made on what you could tell, because with having such a rich life, I mean, you have to choose things not to tell too. There's so many things in one's life, whether it's long or short, that you could include. How did you decide which of those things to put in your book? Of course, you started in the beginning, but how did you fill in all the things that you chose?
Well, I appreciate you observing that because quite a lot of thought went into that and a lot of planning and that kind of thing. But a lot of it had to do with Katie would say, I would be talking to her about, so, and she'd say, "Is that in the memoir?" And I'd say, "Oh my gosh, no." And then the next morning, I'd go write 10,000 words and then I'd whittle it down to a thousand. Um, but it was a joy from beginning to end because I wanted to put mostly stuff in the memoir, Loving Life, that hadn't been in my other books. Like in a lot of books like Conscious Loving and The Conscious Heart, Katie and I tell a lot of stories about our relationship and how it developed and all of those kinds of things. And so that's widely known. And we've talked about that for 30 years now since we were first on Oprah, I think about 34 years ago. We kind of that catapulted us into a whole different world in a way. And so since then, we've done 2,500 workshops around the world on the principles of conscious loving. And so that story a lot is out there, but I wanted to tell stories of things uh, like on the cover, there's a picture of me when I was in the fifth grade. And I wanted to tell the story of what's behind a picture like that. It's
Yeah.
a picture of a very rotund, chubby boy wearing glasses with a kind of an enigmatic smile on his face. And uh, where did that come from? And also, then on the cover is a picture of me with my baby daughter when she was born 50 some years ago. And what's behind that? What was the life that was behind that? And so I wanted to bring those things to life and focus also on moments that had great um, life-changing qualities to me, and also that they were spiritual events as much as they were, in the world, material world events, because they made changes in me at a deep level that was deeper than the emotional level. And so I call that the spiritual realm. And the difference in my type of spirituality is we go inward to find it, not outward and upward to find it. And to me, that's a more inclusive form of divinity, as if we include all of ourselves in it rather than just our mental and uh, so-called higher aspects. So my kind of spirituality is one of inclusion and embracing and finding out who you are at the deepest center of yourself. And so I appreciate that you uh, enjoyed those experiences and also find them applicable to your own life.
Yeah, I found some parallels, and so that's what struck me, and I think that's what a good memoir does. Good not meaning the judgment of the quality of his writing or anything, but the good as it relates to the purpose, which is, I think, to make the connection to the reader's deeper self. And I saw some patterns that I was curious about in my own life, but never really made the connection until I started reading your book, which is you had a lot of jobs, which is kind of one of the things Katie said as you started this interview, from selling watermelons to lemonade to shoveling manure at a circus to all these wonderful things. And I was thinking, I was like, wonder what struck Gay to go out and do these things. And I was like, wait a second, what struck me to go out and have all these random jobs? I've been a professional clown, Mr. Sunshine. I was a paper boy. I I planted Christmas trees. I was like, I sold my art as a little 5-year-old from door to door. And I was like, oh, I was looking for something that I didn't have at home. And that struck me because I never made that deep connection. I always thought it was entrepreneurship, but I'm not enamored with entrepreneurship. I'm enamored with something else. It was something deeper. And so I had to go within in this moment. Okay. And I started realizing I was looking to solve the problems that were around me from going out into the world, looking for the answers I couldn't find at home. And I don't
Mhm.
say that to belittle my family or anybody around me. The adults, they were only capable of what they were capable of. But I found myself in an adult world learning from adults, learning from things. And I was the most unlikely person to be out doing it. I was very shy, very quiet. So that really struck me when I started reading it, and I started noticing patterns in myself. And so I started wondering, and as you divulged, and I knew a little bit about you, I started realizing that there was some seeking going on at a very young age. Is that something that's true, or am I just making weird connections to myself?
No, I really see my writings and my life as a teaching vehicle. And that's what I've dedicated my life to. I made a deal with the universe way back about, gosh, got to be like 60 years ago now, where I said, okay, I want to be able to do the things that I am really good at and have that somehow be helpful to other people. And that I didn't have much of a sense of what I was really good at the time, but I wanted to dedicate that. I dedicated myself to serving that purpose. And once I did that, oh man, everything just kind of unfolded, because one situation, it's like the birds have this invisible way across the sky. They're following some navigational system that we don't know about. And so I think that human beings, that's our invisible way across the sky, is dedicating ourselves to our full potential, what I call our genius, and dedicating yourself to making your life about that and also making it a contribution to other people at the same time. So I've never been the spiritual type of person that encourages people to just sit in a cave and meditate. In fact, I appreciate you just triggered something in me that I'd never ever thought before. You were saying you're not really an entrepreneur, and although you've done many entrepreneurial things, and I was realizing that's me too. I've never even acknowledged that about myself. I'm kind of a shy, quiet person, but I have an obsession, which is seeing things turn into real life. Like
Yeah.
to me, I've talked to 1,000 people who come up to me at a party or something and say, "Oh, I love your books." And then the next thing they say is, "I'm writing a book myself." And, there are so many unwritten books in the world. And I think that I was talking to Jean Houston one time, who's a elder statesperson in my community, and she was saying that, in her opinion, after many trips around the world, that the real tragedy of the world is not poverty, but it's the fact that people don't get to use their creative potential because they got stuck behind a wall of poverty, or they got stuck behind having 17 kids or something like that. And so they don't ever get to that state where they're really feeling like they're expressing their true potential, what I call your genius. And I've had many people, including myself, feel that collective pain. Just go into that collective level in yourself and acknowledge that level of pain. It's a very healing thing to do because I think it deepens compassion when you really can feel the pain as best you can of somebody who's living on $1 a day.
Yeah.
That's a good thing for us to always keep in mind.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I think the two things that struck me about this early understanding you must have had, I always believe that somehow our suffering, the things that people might call traumatic, which I think every soul has, if not now will, opens up the opportunity for them to find why they're here. And your birthday wish in the beginning of the book, where you wished everyone could have happiness and you could, I thought was profound. But also the way you talk about in this book, when you talk about meeting Elvis, which I thought's a wonderful moment, but this idea of this extreme luck and manifesting what you desire, because in your heart you had the goodwill of others, despite what you might have been doing to yourself in your own life. I think that really resonated with me because I sense that true in that the deepest truth in our lives comes from the observation of others' suffering. And then once we see that, we get to observe our own and that we're a mirror for the suffering. Once we let go of that, we have an incredible opportunity to live our life. And that's why I love that you called this loving life, because that's the sense I get from you and Katie. I watch your Instagram just because I'm like, you might be just saying good morning to the cat. It doesn't matter what it is, but I'm like, these are people that are loving life. And that's my whole wish for others, is that they'll live their life with full zest. And it took me forever to figure out. It took me for these 8 years to figure out what you have meant by zone of genius. I was frustrated for the first several years. But when I sat in my moment of presence and I started to write without thought, the world opened up for me.
Mm.
I said, here it is. My zone of genius isn't a thing. It's not a thing. It's my moment. I just disappear. It took me a while, but I really started to feel the sense of what you were gravitating us to through your spiritual journey, which I was really pleased this was a spiritual book. I was really moved. I had to sit back and breathe and take 3 conscious breaths and go, oh my gosh, I wasn't ready for this. I thought I was going to read about Gay's, untold stories, which I did get, but I was really, like I said, transfixed by what you were doing to the reader.
I appreciate hearing that so much. That's my highest intent.
Yeah, the stories that really kind of opened me up was when you started talking about your early life and, trying all these different things from peyote to LSD and traveling on the top of a bus in India or wherever you might be, trekking to Nepal. Um, how vulnerable do you feel comfortable getting when you're doing a memoir like this? What choices do you have to make for yourself? Because there's ones you make that you hold for yourself and those that you give to an audience. How was that for you in that experience, sharing your truth?
I I really didn't go at it with any kind of outline, Azul. I went at it simply by what needs to come next, what kind of emotional tone. If I've told some funny stories, maybe it's time to go on a deeper one that doesn't have a funny punchline. And then maybe it's time to talk about something that gives people some opportunity to breathe. And so I think a lot about the effect of what people are reading. And actually, one of my things that I do to this day, I go to a bookstore and I just look at the books in my general section or look at other memoirs and say, what would make a person reach for mine? And I kind of get that sense of what the user of it, the book purchaser, how they might respond to it. And so I like to kind of do that from beginning to end. What it's got to resonate with me, but then I need to read it to people first, like Katie and others, to make sure it resonates with them. And then it's ready to go out into the broader public.
Yeah, that's great. Like I told you, I was pleasantly surprised that you were. I guess I shouldn't have been. You were teaching. You started teaching in the middle, towards the end of the book, in particular the facts. That was really useful for me. I applied some of those things to my own life and was really becoming aware of some deeper, some scars, some things that were locked in me, some unconscious choices I was making that I had to own and then reverse them and say, well, if that's the unconscious choice I'm making, what am I willing to make? That that's really powerful, Gay, to choose to continue to teach in your memoir, because you could have just brushed over some of those things. But I found it really beautiful how you continued to teach through the memoir, despite you used your own examples. That was really great. Did that just come to you, or did you always plan to have that unfold, or did you just say, "Oh, here's going to have it be a little teaching moment here"? If someone just read that section, they could change their life.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, first of all, but yes, that's part of the plan. I don't want to write any book that doesn't have that quality built into it. I want
Yeah,
the reading of it to be a life-changing experience. And so I forget which chapter you're referring to, but it kind of comes to peaks at different times in the book.
yeah. What would you say if you're giving advice to someone else who's wanting to use their life as a tool for teaching that they need to think about besides these moments of there's moments of gravity. I was really moved by your connection to your aunt Kate or Cat. I think it was
Yeah.
Cat. I I felt the deep sincerity of the story and connection to her, and sort of the protector that you had been for her. I was moved. And then there's times where you made us laugh. Elvis was a perfect point to laugh, and yet it was juxtaposition to your mom who thought he was the devil. And it was just so many clever moments that I felt so beautifully inspired that all these ups and downs in my life were not a mistake by creation. It was part of the plan all along, and I could choose to do what was next. How was it writing those moments again? Because I could sense it was probably hard to write some of that stuff, even
It
though
was
you
very
had talked
hard to
about it.
write. It was an emotional experience. As a matter of fact, nobody that's interviewed me has mentioned the chapter on my Aunt Cat. I appreciate you doing that, but at the moment you mentioned it, it kind of caught me by surprise in a way, and I felt tears coming to my own eyes. So I want to just let you know that uh, it still touches me to this day, the effect that my Down syndrome aunt had on me. that she was such a great teacher in her kind of Zen-like spontaneity, and the fact that she just didn't hold on to any negativity in any way. And
Mm,
we were great playmates when I was little, and then when I went away to school, um, that all changed. But oh, also just having, I learned a lot about compassion with being with her too, because she had certain limitations that she needed help with and that kind of thing. And so I felt very much her protector. And actually, I'm tearing up a little bit as I think about it to this day. It made me who I am.
yeah. Thank you. It was a vulnerable moment because you had to be vulnerable enough to share that it was that some of the pain was coming from within the house, that the way that
Yes.
your grandfather treated her, and yet the way your mother overprotected her and you, but then despised sort of the rest of the family. It was touching and vulnerable. And when you talked about giving her that romper room pin, because I remember watching romper room religiously as well, it just was so touching. I could sense how difficult it was to release her so that you could move on with your life.
Yeah.
That I could sense that pain in the writing, and yet it was necessary for you. So thank you for that chapter because that moved me. I had to sit and just like be at peace because I could. I was trying to reconcile how must have been for you. So
Yeah.
um,
Well, it was one of the tougher chapters to write, um, because I had to relive it. And as you
mhm.
can tell, it's still very, there's not a day go by where I'm not grateful to Kat and my
Yeah,
grandmother too, as well as my, what I call my piece of work mother, uh, my chain smoking mayor of the town mom, who had a degree of stubbornness that transcended just about any type of stubbornness I'd ever seen. And but again, she made me who I am, partly
yeah.
forging opposition to her.
That I could sense that, and I also sense the tension. You dealt with it very lovingly. Um, the tension that was created with your brother. You did it in a beautiful way, a very respectful way. But I sensed that even in him walking you off the field the day you were hit by a ball, that it even brought some difficulty to express the tension in the relationship that might have existed with that one moment, because the hushing of him about you not crying and yet you honoring that was a special moment, but it was also a conflicting moment. I could sense that also as a moment of, wow, that was something to carry and have to release even in writing of that, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, I think all of us kind of build up a personality in the first half of our lives, and then we have to kind of weed out the stuff that not useful to us anymore. Like my
Yeah.
brother lived his whole life out of not expressing any emotions. That was one
Yeah.
of his main things, and his kids will talk about that to this day. And yet at the same time, his brother, me, I'm writing books where I'm talking about my own emotions and that kind of thing. So it
Yeah.
was that kind of extreme upbringing in a way. My brother took very much after my mother, and he was around for 7 or 8 years before I got onto the scene. So they were kind of the original family. And they say that all plots boil down, like in movies or books, boil down to a person goes on a journey. That's one plot. Star Wars, like that. That's all, a person
Yeah.
goes on a journey. Luke sees his world get blown up, and there we go, now for the next 20 years. Um, or the other plot is a stranger comes to town. That pervades a lot of movie plots and book plots. Well, I had both plots going for me because I was the stranger who came to town, kind of the unexpected, dare I say, unwanted pregnancy that gave birth to me. And a great many of us start our lives that way. There's nothing rich or dramatic about that. But then later on, to grow up in a family where I sort of always felt like a stranger, like my brother and my mother would be talking and I would come into the room and they would stop talking, so it always, what were they always talking about? That
Yeah.
uh, I never got to be in on. And so that's still a mystery to me. I don't know that. So, but I think all of us are faced with that same dilemma in a way, especially if we get up to our 30s and into our 40s and 50s. I just turned 80. So I've been kind of at this for a long time and can look back on changes I made in my 30s and 40s. In developmental psychology, we often say your 30s are about finding your life, your 40s are about building your life, and your 50s are about enjoying your life. And if a bunch of things have gone right, if your business went bankrupt in your 40s and you had to go over and work as a greeter at Walmart, that's a big difference. But if things kind of go in the right direction, people begin to enjoy their lives more in their 50s because in our 30s, we're busy trying to find out where we stand and who we are and what our contribution is. And then once we land on that, start really focusing on that in our 40s. And so we have to factor in whatever stage of life you're in, kind of making sure you're not trying to resist it.
Yeah.
Because if you're in your 30s and still trying to work on integrating your feelings, don't feel bad about that. That's what that decade is all about.
Yeah.
If you get up into your 40s and you still haven't crystallized something that you want to focus yet, well, a certain number of people delay that into their 50s. And so I don't want anybody to feel bad about whatever stage of life they're in and measure themselves to what they ought to be doing, because everybody's got a little bit different path they need to go. The only thing that I keep really being a cheerleader for is people asking themselves, what is my genius? What do I most love to do? And can I do it in a way that makes a contribution to other people? Boy, when I see people doing that, I know they're on their way to happiness, good relationships, life satisfaction, uh, all of the above.
Yeah. I I sense that so much, and also the truth in you're telling this because you had some really beautiful moments in your young life, but you also had a lot of your own suffering created from your own life. Like I love the plot in the story. I won't tell it all so people can read it about meeting Jimi Hendrix and that sort of spontaneous yet strange moment to have him paired at a Monkees concert. That was a joyous, genius moment. Um, but also the way in which you described, the first marriage that you had wasn't the match that was supposed to be, and figuring out who you are in the world. You know, the moment you fell on the ice when you were working with the juvenile delinquents, and the pure conscious moment that you had, that really was quite beautiful. And not many people ever get to know what that feeling is. And I appreciate you describing in so many different ways because I got a sense of that in different ways in my life where I realized things that I couldn't have understood without releasing everything that I thought this form was about.
Mm.
And the fact that you could consciously go there when you chose and then live like that is something I learned from you. I really, really took to heart. Whenever things go astray, I sit with the mantra. I say it to myself. If I have to say it 100 times, it does. I say it to myself to get myself back through those moments. And I appreciate you sharing those ways in which these things happened. It wasn't that you didn't have a perfect life and everyone might see it. Oh, I'm on Oprah. I have all these books. I'm a PhD from Stanford. Those are just the superficial parts of you. The deeper parts of you reveal in the book and in the way in which you handled those moments. And what moment in the book for you, even as you were writing it, sparked something kind of surprising for you?
That moment on the ice, if I look back over my whole life, and single out the moment that kind of everything depended on, that all the good that happened in my life, it really did spin around on that moment because I was 300 and some pounds instead of 190 some pounds. I'm 6 feet tall, so 190 something makes me look like a kind of athletic looking old guy. And, but at the time I looked like a pear, PEAR, pear. I was 300 pounds. I was puffing away on 2 packs of Marlboros, 3 packs on a hard day. And, now if I get within a block of cigarette smoke, I can smell it. But anyway, I was in this toxic marriage too, but I had $39 in the bank and couldn't even afford to rent a different apartment. So I had to stay in this toxic stew. And anyway, I had this moment where I fell down, but I didn't knock myself out. And it was it was like somebody turned on the lights in my body for the first time. And I saw, oh my gosh, I have so much anger that I'm withholding that I've never told anybody about. Oh my gosh, I have so much sorrow that I've never talked to anybody about. I have so much fear. And seeing all those things, it was really like turning on the lights, and suddenly over here's anger, down here's fear, down here's my sexual experiences, over here is, you know, but the magic of it was I could see beyond all of that, that there was this radiant backdrop of pure consciousness that was there all the time. I just hadn't ever seen it or felt it because the other stuff was in the way. And
Yeah,
oh man, that changed everything. I realized that's who I am. I'm not the fact that I have a glandular problem and I weigh 300 pounds because of that. Well, that happened to be true. But once I came out of that experience, I started only eating foods that fed my new consciousness. And so for a year, I ate only foods that I'd never eaten before, fruits and vegetables and stuff that I just didn't even consider real food. I thought it was rabbit food. But I learned to love really good natural food. And as a result, I dropped 100 and some pounds by just feeding my pure consciousness. So, self-help book writers out there, if you're listening for a good diet book to write, I'm not going to write that one, but you can write that one. The I love my pure consciousness diet, because once you really make that your home, you can't really take your addiction seriously anymore.
yeah.
Suddenly it became, what? I'm going to put this thing in my mouth and light it and suck smoke into my lungs? What? Why would I do such a thing? You know? So, I've never fortunately been engaged with alcohol. I like a half a beer on a hot day, but I've never been drunk in my life or anything like that. And, as you can tell from the book, my preference is to natural substances like peyote and things like that. If I'm going to get high, back during my getting high days, I went for those natural substances like mushrooms and things like that. Um, so I have always tended, since I started finding my pure consciousness inside, to find every way I could find to feel that in every moment, and as I'm feeling it in this moment. And so I made that kind of my central focus.
Thank you for sharing that. And in the book, you talk about your connection with Ram Dass after that, and asking him questions about this sort of new awakening of your consciousness. And that's why I said I was so surprised, delightedly surprised, that I was like, oh my gosh, he's calling this a memoir. This is a spiritual transformation book. I'm shifting. Everything is shifting in me. I don't know what's happening. I was telling my husband, you have to read this. I can tell you this, but you have to read this. And he's like, okay, you don't get excited about, but you read a book every week. I was like, I know, but he goes, and Gay Hendricks, your favorite author. I know, but this is surprising me. And it really made me face some things about my behaviors and habits, because I ultimately want the world to be fulfilled with its love and happiness. And I want that for myself. I don't want it just for others. I want this back and forth loving and giving. And I feel like that was the purpose of this book for me, was to have that sense of beauty come into my life. I hope that anyone's listening to this already is inspired to read this memoir, Loving Life. It's an incredible memoir. It's a spiritual transformation. It's an opportunity to see yourself. It's a mirror into who we are as humans. And Gay, I couldn't be more grateful for this podcast exists because of you, and I will continue to write and do these beautiful things in the world because of my zone of genius is now within me. Thank you for this. Is there anything else you would share with us before we go?
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the quality of your questions and being allowed to free range. And there's hours and hours more I could talk about, but I really appreciate us being able to kind of synthesize it down. So thanks for what you're doing in your genius zone, and long may you prosper.
Thank you so much.